Okay, now this is where things get a little bit more challenging, but also kind of fun. So this is a funny thing. We're going to be handling this dough with water at this point. Later on we'll be using flour when we shape it. Right now we're doing something called pre-shaping of the loaves. Now you want to be very gentle with the bread at this time, with the dough. We're using the water like we have before to keep things from sticking. And we're actually going to use just a little tiny bit of it here on the counter space. Just a tiny bit of water. Again, we're trying to be really gentle not to take the gas out of the dough any more than is necessary. Now I want to explain a little bit about why I'm working on this surface, but also why I have the breadboard nearby, this cutting board. This is a little bit colder in our house. Colder than the temperature that I'd like things to rise at. So I'm trying to keep the exposure to this cold to a minimum. This is insulated a little bit, and I found it actually does help a little bit to pre-shape and then put it on there. So I'm going to use just a little bit of water to help with this. I'm roughly dividing the dough in half at this point for the pre-shaping so that we can have two separate loaves of bread. This is kind of fun. And now I'm using this kind of gather up the dough and pull it. I need my fingers and my tools to be kind of wet to keep from sticking. I'm going to repeat that a couple of times. So again, we're gathering this dough together and then pulling it. You know, I could have left that dry and it probably would have pulled a little better, but that's okay. It should work out fine. Once again, I'm going to take it again and move it here. We're pre-shaping the loaf. And then I'm going to move it over here to the wooden cutting board. Now this is a wetter dough than I would recommend doing the first time. You're going to see why that's important as we go along at this stage. This is where things get difficult for someone who's new to handling dough. If you've just done if you just did 700 grams of water and then adding 50 later, as we talked about, then this job will be a little bit easier. It's a little more challenging at this point. We're going to lay it right there, and yes, they'll kind of smush into each other, but that's not a problem for us. We'll be letting that sit there for about 20-30 minutes before we do the final shaping of the dough. Once again, this is the most challenging part of working with sourdough bread. Doing artisan unshaped, or I should say not loaves that are not put in pans to hold their shape. This is the trickiest part, and it takes some practice, but it's okay. Not that big a deal. So I'm trying to use my scraper, my wet scraper, to collect up all the dough out of that. Once again, trying to be careful not to take any unnecessary air, any unnecessary gas out of the loaves. And of course the cat's complaining because she's not getting attention right now. So I'm going back to my metal scraper, which I really like using. This thing is a really nice tool. Roughly parting the dough, dividing it into two separate loaves, and then using this to collect it up and pull it toward me. Collecting the dough again and pulling toward me to give a very rough, roundish shape. Again, if you're using less water the first time, which I do recommend, you're going to find this will be a little easier to manage. So really good reason to start with the lower hydration before going to the higher hydration doughs. You know, we probably ought to add a recipe on one of these links as you're going through this so you can see. Now you can see it's starting to spread out, but that is okay. I'm going to do this again, pre-shaping the loaf, trying to get it up a little bit taller, a little bit higher, and each time it gets moved, it's actually developing a little bit more gluten. Not a lot, but it's adding to a little bit more to this, kind of like the stretching we were doing, the turning that we were doing in the container. It helps to contribute to the final shape of the loaf. So one more time, I'm going to pull it and collect it toward me. That's a little ugly, but I can live with it. And then we'll put it right there. We'll let these sit just as they are. You don't want it to be drafty, but we'll let them sit just as they are for about 20, 30 minutes. This is a good time to have the room relatively warm, say 75, maybe even 80 degrees if that's possible, so that it helps with the continued rising. Thank you.